seconds, see if anybody connects, and then we'll get rocking. I don't have an intro video, guys, so we'll just have to do B-roll as we sit. And I already wasted Ian
making it
going to the
up.
coffee pot.
Let's turn
There it
that.
is. There's the side shot. We're good.
It's all about angles.
All right. So, what I wanted to chat about today is I got an email from a friend of mine in Australia. He is a former print company with software development as well, and some of this some other things, but growing massively into an MSP, like really starting to mature and starting to get into, are we doing well as an MSP? Are we successful or not? And so he sent me this email, and I wanted to kind of bring this up. But as always, guys and gals, if you're watching, pop messages in the chat. We'll love to interact with you. It'll be very helpful for our conversation. But I want to get started with kind of what his concepts were. And I also realized that this was never my role. I was a VCIO, right? I was a service. I was actually in service. I was a technician. I was an engineer. I was a chief of technology. But I never really designed the KPIs and tracking of whether we were a successful business. That kind of wasn't my responsibility. So I brought smart folks in with me to help answer this for you, Mark. So here we go. I'm going to bring up the comments that were already kind of talked about, and then I'm going to let you smart people kind of get started on this, on how do you track if you're successful as a growing MSP? That's the question. Don't jump at once. Just somebody
All
rock
right.
into it.
I'll walk into the buzzsaw. I'll walk into the buzzsaw. So there's a lot of really, really good numbers up on there. I picked out the ones that at Doberman we really, really nailed down and focused on, which
Okay.
SLA violations or tickets about to violate SLA for the obvious reason. It's the tickets dying on the vine. Response resolution time. Response and resolution time combined were the two biggest indicators of a per client health. So we would have overall response and resolution time, but we would have a drill down metric out of BrightGauge to pop in and look into on a per client basis what's their average response and resolution time on their tickets. That above CSAT score or CSAT surveys or anything was the number one indicator of client health when it comes to service desk satisfaction. Contract profitability, for again obvious reasons, you want to make sure that someone's not running too hot or too cold when it comes to their profit, so you can have a contract be too profitable.
Okay.
Lead time for project.
Help me understand that. Did you just say you can have a contract
We're
be
gonna make too much
profitable?
money.
Yeah, you're making too much money on it. You're not spending enough time. They're not going to perceive enough value out of the contract.
Gotcha.
So if you're charging someone $8,000 a month and they're only interacting with your engineers 5 times a month because they're super great, then that trunk slammer can come by and say, hey, we'll do it for $3,000. And they're going to see a $60,000 cost saving. That's all they're going to see.
Gotcha.
And even when it falls apart in 6 to 9 months later and everything's terrible and now that nice stable infrastructure that you managed to construct is completely destroyed, they're not going to come back to you because that's an awful lot of crow that they got to eat to be able to admit that they were wrong. And nobody likes to say that.
You actually hit a good point. Now, and Dom, I want you to jump in on this next. But, we had a client that grew and they eventually got really, really large and we were actually undercharging them. And it was actually getting pretty rough. And then we had to make right pricing. And it was sour because it happened after, 2 years of growth. And then they left and then they came back. And then they left again. And the second time they left was because of the pain of somewhat of that crow and some of that. And some people made the mistakes of saying, man, I'm glad you guys learned that we were the better. And I think you actually hit that for me and pulled a little bit of a trigger because you're right. It's very tough when you're coming back to that going, man, I made a big mistake. And it's how you handle it. It's about being graceful. And from that moment on, we learned about being graceful in onboarding, graceful in offboarding, like really try to be good about that. So great point. But Dom, what are your thoughts on how do you know if you're a successful MSP as you're growing from a KPI?
And you showed me the email yesterday, and I was looking at it, and I was like, I don't know how much help this guy needs because I think I measured every single one of those metrics, right? The only one that I would add that we used was cost per human that we supported, right? And yours was cost per endpoint. You said.
Yeah.
But we operated on like this people-centric model. So understanding down to the individual person we're supporting, how much does it cost to support that person? Then we pulled out this really cool average based on like hard costs and soft costs across the whole business right, on average, how profitable is our stack, and we can make intelligent pricing decisions because we had that clause in the contract about inflation, right? So
Right.
it went up to 7%, which ironically this year or last year we would have used the whole damn thing, but we would obviously take inflation, and then if our margins weren't right on the average, then we would add, I don't know, a point, right, to try to make sure that we're meeting a certain average profitability per user. But I'm really interested, or the point about too much money is really interesting, right? And making sure you're delivering that perceived value. Never thought about measuring it that way. Never taken the too hot side of the coin. So I like that a lot.
And is that a mix of trying to measure the strategic as well as the engineer side, right? Like, as Ian kind of poked it out just as an answer, but I think, for me, it would be about trying to find that mix, right? How much am I being strategic and how much am I reactive, right? Especially when you're starting to look at that, even if you are making too much, right? Am I at least
I want to drive
strategic
tickets per
value?
client per month down, right?
For sure.
Because
Yeah,
if you're calling the help desk, you're already having a bad day, right?
Right.
I want to show value by preventing your people from having a bad day. If you don't have to call the help desk, it means things are working, right? And you illustrate that through the work you do to prevent them from needing to call the help desk, if that's modernization, whatever it is, right? I think the trick is now showing the fruits of the work becomes harder because I'm not calling Tom and Tom's not fixing my issue very fast. But it's hard for me to realize I just didn't have the issue.
Go ahead, JP.
Right?
Well, I was going to ask, Dom, that's interesting you say that, because one of the things that we ended up doing was creating a couple of, and I guess I hope none of our client partners are necessarily going to see this, but we created a couple of fake accounts, and we actually pay for them in ConnectWise to have some of the automation actually work, so it looks as though they're opening and closing certain tickets, and some of that automation is working. So they still see on a per tech basis that they're doing so much work and we're doing so much of this back end work. But
no, that's okay. I mean, we used to we wrestled with that, JP. I wrestled. I know our people wrestled with the understanding of how do you show all the stuff I'm trying to automate? And I think that is, in my opinion, like if I looked at it right now with the lens I have now, we're heading to become a commodity. And I think trying to fight commodity with how much I can automate is just going to be how much everybody else can also summarily automate, I think, in my opinion.
Right.
So my thoughts would lend towards tracking it around, for your own knowledge and for your own costing knowledge, potentially, of how much you guys are growing. If you're trying to track a team of centralized services or a team that's executing on those growth pieces, that'd be my thoughts on it. But again, wasn't the guy that tracked the numbers, so take it with a big old grain of salt. So, earlier, Ian, you and I were talking, and you actually had a comment that was actually, I thought, quite poignant towards this, right? And it wasn't about what do you track. It was about why do you track, and where do you assign that associate of, like, where can they actually meet this at all? Can they even influence this lever, right? Can they even reach up and pull the lever? So, Ian, I'd love for you to kind of go back into a little bit of long form on that for me.
Yeah. The some of the key, when I was reviewing this email, when you had shot it over to me, Matt, is much more around thinking at a 10,000 foot view. So defining that why, right? Channeling your inner Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
And starting with why around each metric. Why do you care about this metric? But then also figuring out who cares about that metric. Is this metric important to the MSP, or is it important to your clients?
Yeah.
Right. One of the things that we were guilty at every once in a while was a bit of hubris and getting a little bit too big for our britches, instead of thinking, like, why does this company exist? It exists to allow for our clients who are non-technical resources to have stable, secure, reliable infrastructure, so that
and
they
hopefully
can
no more
their...
metal in the closet, as Dom says, right? Like, ultimately, if I was that honest, but
like they just want to be able to use technology so that they can do their primary function, whether that's taking care of people's healthcare or performing legal advice or giving tax advice, whatever it is. They're not there to be technologists. They probably don't even like technology that much. A lot of them, it's just a necessary evil in their mind. And so with that lens, it's okay, how can we get this out of their way so that they can do their job better? Yeah, that's the piece that's becoming commoditized, to kind of circle back around. But I'll circle back around to that. So why is it important? If we focused on the metrics that the clients truly cared about, which response time, resolution time, the number of tickets maybe that they had to open per month, so how often are they having to interact with us? We really defined why those were important to the client.
Yeah.
and kept those at heart. And anything that was only important to us, we devalued. So we devalued those metrics that were only important to us, the MSP,
I think
and said, like, that's the wrong focus for us.
I think the challenge that exists is that I see this cliff coming, right? Of such a delineation in what we're doing as an industry. And I think if my CPA only focused on how quickly they responded to me, how much they, and so I think you have to actually put a more strategic focus as well. I'm not saying you didn't, but you have to put it as well in saying, how am I doing stuff that they don't want to hear, that they don't understand, that I'm going to have an educational burden to overcome, that I'm going to have to, and so like, how do you track that strategic maneuvering of a company towards what, their ultimate competition is going to beat them with if they don't change? Right.
Well,
We're kind of at this precipice of, oh, I've got a server, it's Active Directory, and I have this, da-da. How do you track that strategic manipulation through time of those customers? And it can't just be touch points. It almost has to be some degree of this like next project towards perfect and some kind of measurement of an assessment, if you will, towards what is good, in my mind. But just
we've been
adding that little piece.
measuring these binary numbers for so long, and IT is a commodity because we focus on, we provide the best help desk and we provide the best, cybersecurity, no malware service, and we do this, that.
God, don't say it out loud.
You can't focus on that. I know. I had to throw it in there for you.
Poke me in the stomach.
Like, we're not focusing on the business, right? Like how?
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite customers I ever had. Right? He was a cold call lead. I went to his office and he said, "Tell me how you're going to help my business succeed." Right? And that is the core of what we can do as technologists. Is we can help them put technology in a place that drives their competitive advantage. Right? They can move faster than the guy next door. They can accomplish something quicker. Right? They have more strategy in place around cybersecurity. They can explain things better when people ask about it, or whatever. Like whatever needs to happen for them to be better at what they do. That's what we should be trying to drive, right? And there's a million and one ways to do that. But as technologists, I think we've all lived in this world of, like you said, Active Directory and Metal and cloud this, and it doesn't matter. Like obviously it matters internally, but to the customer, it just doesn't matter.
But that same conversation is, I know that I can keep you secure on whatever device you touch, however you access your data, in ways that we can at least predict the risk and make it just work for you. And if you think about it, like you made a post that really touched me about this the other day, and I've said it for a couple of years, and it was this talking about how your competition is going to be able to hire away your people because their technology is better. And the first time that really dawned on me is we had a marketing assistant. She was brilliant. She had just finished her first degree. She was working on her master's. And she said, I had this really bad experience last year on an internship. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, all your stuff here just works. Like I just knew how to use it right away. And she said, I didn't understand an S drive or a V drive. I've never had, and it dawned on me, she'd never, ever, ever had a map drive. She had Google Docs in middle school. She had Microsoft in high school, and she went to college and used Microsoft. Like the world was never that. It was Angry Birds to her. Right? The minute that she turned on her phone and Angry Birds worked is the same way her Word worked. It was the same way she stored files with her teacher. It was that's the difference we're fighting. Right. And so when I talk about a cliff, I'm talking about like a lot of functions and parts of that come with being able to drive a customer from where they were to where they need to be and educate them along the way.
Like back to metrics, like
again, because these are good metrics for tracking my business, right? Like I think that's true.
Like, what can we measure that helps us understand how we're driving a client's success? Because it's a very hard thing to measure.
Revenue growth, staff count, impact.
Their revenue growth is a great
exactly.
Like
huge. So getting into this, I mean, Dom, you're preaching to my soul here around like stop focusing on iron, stop focusing on speeds and feeds or nuts and bolts, whatever you want to talk about it with, right? The concept of getting down to, hey, what is the measurable impact on your business, Mr. Customer, is the crux of where that, when you do get the infrastructure stable and help desk calls do go down because everything's working and everything's set up properly and things like that, that's where that account manager or VCIO, as well as technical project engineers, come in and say, hey, like you are at a point of stability. Let's start talking about your business. What are your growth goals? What is your strategic plan? And how are we going to help out with that? And it doesn't necessarily have to be pie in the sky huge things, right? One of the easy conversations we had was a blank spreadsheet with everyone. We'd sit down and say, hey, let's just talk to me about the software you use. Here's like 10 things I could think of right off the bat. What else do you have? And they'd just start listing them out, and I'd say, okay, well, like what websites do you go onto routinely, etc. And invariably you'd find expenditures where they're buying the same product 3 times.
Right.
And it's hey, like, okay, well, let's like this and this and this. I'll do the same. Which one do you like the best? Well, we like this one the best. All right, well, let's get rid of these 2. And oh wow, we just saved you $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right.
For a 10-minute conversation. And then like they sit down and they go, whoa, okay. And then they're talking about, hey, we're having this massive problem getting institutional knowledge out of our senior staff and transitioning it on to other people. And we just don't have the ability to do this. And we're looking into LMS or learning management system, all these other types of things. And it's like, oh, well, you know that Microsoft Streams is free with your Office 365 thing. What's this Streams thing? Well, here, let me show it to you. And their world changes, right? Like these simple conversations with the people on your team who know what your clients are buying and consuming, and having a conversation and say, well, tell me about that struggle. And asking, Matt, we were talking about this a little bit, asking why 3 or 4 or 5 times on any one topic, like going deeper and deeper and deeper to the root cause, can really expose some huge value to your customers. I had an electrical contractor who's a pen and paper guy, much like myself. And he said, I got this big problem with having all these different notebooks and things like that. And I said, hey, OneNote. What do you mean? OneNote? You got an Android device? Google Lens? Like, here you go. Text transcribe. Take a little quick photo of your pen and paper. Bump it into a OneNote that's shared with your team. And off you go to the races. Changed the guy's world.
Well, I want to be true to what we're trying to answer
charged
here.
him nothing for that, right? And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Right.
But if you measure that as time saved,
we are on metrics. Yes,
we are on metrics. But now I'm gonna indulge myself for a second too here, because I think that this is actually exactly what I preach so much, that we are converting to a true professional service, and all the iterations and the ways that might play out, right, are huge, right? Of all the different consultings you could do, all the different things, and it all comes down to everybody's gonna have the same tools. Everybody's going to be in Google, or is going to be in AWS, or is going to be in Microsoft. And you're going to have to help them use the same scalpel and the same fat spreader and the same other things to be better with their technology and to drive their business to growth, right? So, JP, how do you, and this is putting you on the spot a bit, and it's only because I love you, but how do you track this somewhat esoteric piece of the actual amount of time that's being touching the change of what I want to see in my company if I'm being commoditized for the things that I'll be able to script down the road, right? Like I know it's a little of a hard question, but
it is. But I think I don't know how much I'm gonna add here, but I think echoing what Ian said about the less that they end up using to us. One of the selling pitches that we have to do when we're going out and doing some business development is say, look, Mr. Client Partner, our goal here is the same. We want to add to our bottom line. So the more I can get you to use technology and to not call our help desk, to use our project side of the business more in developing different projects for you, the less time it is for us and the more time it goes to our bottom line. So I want to see my bottom line grow as much as I want to see your bottom line grow. How are we going to help each other? And Ian, I like what you asked. It's some of the things we asked during either our monthly or our quarterly reviews with our client partners is saying, hey, we don't want to talk to just you, our contact. We want your whole leadership team in here because we're going to ask a bunch of questions. And knowing those questions to ask purely comes from a lot of experience or having these conversations like we're having right now and listening to one another. And I think that's key. But how do you measure that? That's a hard question to answer. I'm not sure how you do it unless you go back to the roots of those.
Well, I think it depends on what challenges they've brought to you. Right. So like a great example, it's my favorite examples. This customer I had, they had this check request process. So someone gets an invoice, goes through the accounting team. Well, their strategy in their shared drive days was like drop it in S/something/inbox. And somebody has to monitor that inbox folder.
Oh, no. And then puts it in the right place.
And then they file it and get the check written. Well, we moved him to SharePoint. We didn't know about this process yet. And we lifted him to SharePoint. And I got an alert on just suspicious activity in that folder just because files are moving through it so fast. And I was like, what are you guys doing here? Like, because you did so much in this one folder that we got a call about it. So, like, what is, it was like, oh, yeah, we have this. And I was like, holy crap, right? So we did this whole Power Automate with Microsoft Form, and you uploaded, and we automated that whole process, right? And took a whole person out of that process who had to monitor this, whack inbox folder.
And I
So
don't
the
even think
measurement
it
of that
has to
is
be
you could
complicated.
process things faster and more securely in an authenticated way. And it was like, so I think you have to take those small wins and figure out what sort of business pulse, right, they contribute to.
Just really quickly on that, Dom, it's small to us, it's big to them.
Yeah.
Right.
So who's met, like, which yardstick are you looking at, right?
True.
Like,
it's a lens function.
Exactly. It's such a simple thing to automate this thing or show a guy how to use OneNote or whatever, but you fundamentally changed their world. You just took a $40, $50, $60,000 asset and freed up 5, 10, 15, 20 hours of payroll for forever that can now be used on the business achieving goals instead of a useless admin task. That is a huge, massive impact to the organization. And to you guys, it's like, yeah, we wrote a script. You're welcome.
I met an MSP. I met an MSP, and I won't say it out loud. But JP, you know him, Ian, you know him quite well. But he actually had an experiment with one of those kind of high churn that became low churn, commoditization. Now I'm a strategist customers, right? Because I see this vision fast forwarding, right? At some point, we will have to be the person that comes in and talks strategy, and then basically executes somewhat similar things in space. But he went down to just participating in raw profit as his methodology of being paid. And he said, you know what? You want to track this? You know who I'm talking about, JP. But you don't want to track this? If you grow, I want 1% of your growth or 2% of your growth. I want to, and what it came down to, and I think it's a thought experiment. I don't know that it's perfect. I think there's other factors. But in the same way, my financial advisor, there are models where they will participate in my growth as the methodology of being paid. Right. There are types of shares and methods where that is the way it works. And so you have this like real understanding of partnership and dual teamwork. But what a metric. If you simply every quarter gathered what your financials came down to and what your gross profits were, you have some problems, right? Because you have investments and capital that go back into the business that might affect that gross profit when it comes down to it. Like, but if you went by like EBITDA or something, right? Or you went by by those type of things and said, okay, I want to get down to that, then your $60,000 human in your example should show up in that role in either growth and capacitance by hiring someone or reusing them in a different fashion for profit, or it would show up in the cost reduction of removing, the paper pushing commodity in that sense, right? So I think that it's just a neat thought experiment to kick around of just trying to track gross profit in some form or fashion with your customers or net or whatever it might be. You guys are the smart people about finances.
I want to circle back around just for a second about something that you guys were talking about earlier that I didn't get to comment on was that making too much profit from a particular client partner. One of the things that we all look at, my whole team does, is when we sign on we don't sign on so many client partners every month, but as soon as we do, one of the metrics that we look at, the whole team does, not just leadership, is, hey, this particular, our gross revenue for every single client, percentage of that overall. And that's an important one that we look at every single time we add somebody on, because we've had that time twice now where we've had a client that was becoming too much profitable, and they were growing so fast and taking too much of our time and too much percentage overall of the gross, that luckily we had such a great rapport with them. They gave us almost a year advance before they went public, and we knew what we needed to do to get off that. But boy, you want to talk about making the 50+% profit on somebody, and then all of a sudden you're back down to the normal 20-25% that they'll make. You're doubling what you have to pick up and fill in that hole. But that was one thing I wanted to just comment on what you guys were talking about.
Well, you got a question, JP, so this one's all yours, buddy.
Oh, I do. Oh, what's my threshold?
So when he's talking about any single client being X percentage of your business, in the statement you had made earlier, kind of what's your threshold? What makes you unhappy?
10%. If any of them get to 10%, I'm freaking out, and we all put on our selling hat.
So what's the response to that? Is it add customers, or what? What's your response?
Trying to re-engage projects that they said that they weren't going to do, from the year before that they were pushing off. It's us all going in and trying to all of our client partners and saying, hey, can you recommend this to anybody right now? I mean, everything that we can, we pull out, no stops at all, and try to get more client partners. As soon as they start. 15%.
When we would have a double-digit client, we would actually do a strategic review internally around that client.
Mm.
So client 1 is now 10%. What's right, wrong, missing, and confusing about client 1? Why have they grown in such a dichotomous way to everyone else? Why is their spend out of control?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
usually it's something with that account. Like, and sometimes it's
And-
just like, hey, they're gangbusters, they're growing, they're acquiring whatever, and they happen to like
Right.
rapidly
Yeah.
grow over a period of time. But we are doing something wrong that is causing this account to abnormally spend faster than everyone else.
Right.
And so we then focused in on the problem and not necessarily trying to like grow.
So you're
over
not
here or whatever.
focusing on MRR percentage of overall revenue. You're also focusing on project, on all those others. That could
Yep.
almost be a bit of a misleading piece, right? It could be the ones that are the most engaged in actually meeting security or have a compliance. So I would just be careful. And that's why you said you do a review, right? A strategic review. And you can say, no, this is all strategy. This is all good. We're not dealing with just crap off. Yeah, that makes sense. I like it.
But sometimes it's like hey, this one kicked the can. We dropped the ball for a 24, 36 month
some real
period,
anger
and they're
in
just having to like churn infrastructure, and we're at huge risk on this account for them walking out the door because they're going to look back at a 12-month review and say, wow, our IT spending blew up.
Yeah.
So we need to re-engage, and we need to really dial down and say like, hey, you're spending a lot of cash right now. Do you want to look into financing? Do you want to look at some things because you're just burning capital?
And
because
that's being
you didn't do
strategic
it for this. Yeah.
That's being strategic with them.
Shiva, to
Might
answer
be
your
taking a
last
seat in the
question-
boardroom, you could call it.
Yep.
Go ahead, JP.
Shiva, let's answer your last question. We forecast out our cash flow on that client in just a separate spreadsheet.
Yep.
And I will say, I want to talk about this because I got hurt a little bit. We bought an MSP, and they had disclosed to everybody in their due diligence that they had no single customers in the double-digit space, right? And they were somewhat contractual and things like that. And anyways, as we dug into it, they had like 9 customers that were under one umbrella that were all separated in their numbers that equaled 38% of their revenue. And like we got crushed. It hurt really, 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 really bad. It was not a pleasant. We barely broke even on that in a 2-year period. It was brutal. So
that's why structuring is important. This is a little bit off topic, but if you've got a customer or subsidiaries and they want separate bills, roll that up in the PSA so that you can report on. Like, man,
don't let it surprise you. Is the point?
60%.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
it's brutal.
Completely to like randomly shift, since we do have that big metric umbrella under there. Another big point that I had, and I'll just snap my fingers because it's like a huge shift of topic. Another piece is when you're setting metrics, no matter where they're at, whether it's engineer or sales or admin or executive or what have, controllability was a big thing that I always kept in my mind. Who controls the impact of this metric? And are you judging a resource on a metric that is mostly out of their control? Because if you are, that's really, really unfair to the engineer or to that resource.
Oh, yeah.
So
Talk about making somebody not feel great.
Yeah, if you're putting a metric, which might be really important, and you're saying like, hey, Matt, you're going to be judged on this, and Matt has very little or no ability to impact that metric, you are assigning that metric to the wrong resource.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you just don't manage the metric, but you can't hold that person to account. If I'm the sales guy and I can radically affect that metric up or down, you cannot do that to a resource that can't impact that metric. You have to, the person who impacts the metric, they're the person who has to own it.
Yeah, and I think like if you're a growing company and you're starting to build layers, frontline managers and midline leadership, you need to start to develop some sort of system that runs down. Like, so PAX 8, we just implemented OKRs, which I don't know a lot about, but I'm learning a lot about them very quickly. And it rolls from the frontline employee all the way up to John Street, right? Like, so there's these goals set, but what we do is we break them down into how each team can contribute to them, and then my role is to break down into how each of my team members can contribute to that goal. So if you're gonna set a high level goal for the entire business, it's best to find a way like how can everyone contribute. If I want to grow revenue, well then the service team needs to provide the best service so that everyone's happy. We don't lose customers, right? Sales team needs to accomplish X, Y, Z, and breaking that down so that I can look at our company's goals all up globally. but I can drill all the way down to what my responsibility is to drive that metric, I think is huge, because now everyone feels like they're contributing to the direction of the company. And you can miss that very easily and have a real culture and job satisfaction problem, because people just don't feel like they're contributing anything, right? They feel like they're turning a wrench, and no one wants to feel like they just turn a wrench.
Everybody knows what they're contributing when they're carrying a log in the water, right? Like everybody's got a handle on top of it. Everybody knows they're quite aware of it. And I think that's what you're giving is context to that, and being able to be aware of like how your actions would actually aid a goal or a particular objective or key result.
Right.
But I think the best thing we've touched on, and we're going to try to wrap this up here and give everybody a second to kind of close us out. But, I think the best thing to touch on is, how do you focus on the stuff that matters in a non-commoditized or semi-commoditized world? And how do you track the things that are going to be what you have to look like when we shift to more professional services, when we shift to more strategy, when we shift to more making someone more successful with the same tools their next door neighbor would use? And I think that's the hardest part to measure, in my opinion. So let's round it out. Everybody wrap us up. Ian can go first since he said so.
So I'm going to give away two of what we referred to our big idea core strategies, some of the secret sauce that we used on this. It's because I love you, Matt. So two, and because it's metrics, I will frame them in the metrics that we measured. I'm not going to tell you how, but I'm going to tell you what.
Well, that's how you get people to go to R&R Consulting. A shameless plug. So, anyways,
that's right. That's right. You want to know how? You got to call me.
Yeah.
But two of the big metrics that we would present in our strategic business reviews when we got someone past that, like, hey, we're just trying to stabilize,
right,
was number of dollars saved over previous period. So rolling 12 months, here's how many dollars we saved you.
And that's a hard one to track. How do you do that? Would you give me the 5 second? No, I'm just kidding. I know you said you
gotta give me a call.
All right, and the next
call. Number of dollars saved and percentage revenue growth.
Yeah,
for the client.
Great.
So we would collect that data and present it back. Hey, here is the percentage revenue growth over a period, and here's the number of dollars saved. And that is a really big hammer. That drives home impact, right? And you get
and it goes back to what does the client care about? No, it goes back to what does the client care about? You literally just took numbers off of their balance sheet, right? And out of their pro forma. So I love it. That's great. Dom?
I want to first shout out to Mr. Anonymous who sent this to us.
Yep.
You clearly did some research, because there's a lot of awesome metrics that you came up with, and I honestly struggled when we were looking at this together and was like, what else would I measure?
Yeah, what can I add to this?
It took me a minute. Yeah. So good job. But I would say, focus on becoming that strategic business partner, right? And I'm going to do a shameless plug. On Monday, we're doing a stream called Taking a Seat in the Boardroom, where we really hope to dive into what it's like to be a business advisor, not a commoditizer. So I think that'll be a fun conversation really related to what we've touched on here. But I think he did a great job. I love the metrics he came up with, and I think he's clearly doing his research and setting himself up for success. So, and thanks Ian and JP for joining us on such short notice.
And in fact, before I hand off to JP, I'll say, when I get the emails from this gentleman, I almost kind of like have a little bit of I have to plan to read it, because he does so much research and so much work. And I'm humbled that someone thinks I'm valuable enough to write that to, right? And ask that question. So I will say super duper thanks to my friend that sent that to me. You'll know who you are. JP, I saved the best for last from one of my best friends, and I'll let you close us out with words of wisdom, buddy.
Well, I don't know if I'd live up to that, but I appreciate that very much. And echoing what Don says, man, that was really good. I came into this going, man, I don't know that we can give them a whole lot. But I will say that one of the things when we were first starting out, trying to figure out from a metric standpoint, what we needed to measure was we stressed way too much over it. What we ended up doing is really, we wanted the whole team to be buying into all of it. Kind of going back to some of the stuff we were saying is, don't give that engineer a metric that he has no control over. So at the very least, letting everybody understand what all these metrics mean to us and the leadership team, all the way down to the tech out on the bench, and so start with 1 or 2 or 3. It looks like you're using Bright Gauge. Bright Gauge is good. That's what we used. It helped a great deal on simplifying what we really wanted to look at, and why we were actually looking at it, and why it matters, and how they all interacted with each other and affected each other. And
Yeah.
so I would say definitely don't stress about it. Just keep adding the ones that you got in there, making sure that the entire team understands why it matters.
And don't let perfect be the enemy of good, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
that's what you're
Yeah.
distilling there. So
Yeah.
thank you guys all and gals for watching us and paying attention. I hope we've helped somebody in some way. Ian and JP, you guys don't work with me directly and aren't forced to have to work with me in this way. So thank you so much for taking such short notice and showing up. I always appreciate your advice in most capacitances. So thank you all, and we'll see y'all
Thanks for
later.
having me.